Hey guys, I have been in the process of launching a Railo environment on the Amazon's Elastic Beanstalk, and there is a great blog post here on Railo that helps you get started. But there was a number of head scratchers for me. Now keep in mind I'm coming from a traditional web environment where you have a server. Maybe you're working with Dreamweaver, a repository of some sort, and you deploy from the repository. So I was coming from a very traditional way of doing Cold Fusion web development, and I was also using a Cold Fusion server. So for me, there was this tutorial was extremely helpful in getting me started, but there was a bunch of gaps that I hope to help you guys out with this video. So the only thing I have to say about this tutorial that's online is that you should follow it exactly. You need to get the exact versions of Eclipse that they call for, and you need to do this blog in the exact order. Matter of fact, I have 2 versions of Eclipse here just to make this process easy, because I scratched my head on this whole deal for about 8 hours one day and just decided to go back to the beginning and actually follow the instructions. Once I did that, it worked out great. So at some point though, once you follow the instructions, they're going to have you actually unzip the contents of the Railo server zip file. And so that's going to look something like this here. And they're also going to have you create a AWS Java web project in Eclipse. And that's going to look something like this here. If you'll notice, it's going to have a folder called Web Contents. This Web Contents is exactly what you're going to take the zip file, so the zip file contents, and you're going to literally replace that Web Contents folder with the contents of the zip file. And that's actually in the blog. So if you get all the way down to the bottom, it'll actually walk you through that process as well. But here's where things got a little tricky for me. So I was able to get, by following the blog, I was able to get my web service up and running. And so we're going to go ahead and run it. And if you've done and you followed the blog exactly, then you should have something that looks like this. Ta-da! The Railo web server is up and running. Now here's where I started to really struggle and the blog stops. So if you go to the Railo server administrator, what you're going to have is it's actually going to prompt you with a new password and then a password confirmation field, and you're going to enter that and you're going to save it. But the problem is that whenever you go and you deploy this package onto the Elastic Beanstalk, all those settings are going to be gone. And the reason why those settings are gone is because it actually saves the server settings in Railo server XML. But if you'll look in this path, you'll actually see this is a temporary file that's created by Eclipse whenever you run your Java web project. Same is true of the web server. Now, if you're confused about what the server administrator versus the web server, then go and read some documentation. But basically, the server administrator allows you to control the entire server. The web administrator allows you to control a single site, single Cold Fusion site. Again, there's a bunch of documentation that explains that pretty well. But even here, you'll see that there is another XML file, and this again is where all the settings are stored for the web context, and it too is in a temp directory. So the question is that if you go and you deploy this project to your Elastic Beanstalk, then how do you ensure that these settings go along with it? Otherwise, what you're going to have is you're going to have an environment that has a password, that has an open password the moment you deploy it, and that's no good. Also, database settings will not go with your deployed package. And in addition to that, as if AWS needs, or Elastic Beanstalk needs to create new environments, none of those settings will go into that new environment. So I mean, this was a real head scratcher for me, and maybe it's old hat to a bunch of folks. I would have loved to have been able to find something online that told me what to do, but I couldn't find anything. So what I learned is that basically what's going to happen is whenever your package is created, it's going to take the contents of this and it's going to use it to create that temporary setup. And so what that means is if you start at the temporary folder, which is temp0 right here, and you work your way up, you'll actually see web-inf. So if you just pretend like this web-inf is this folder right here, then whatever files that you need to create, if you will create them in this structure here, so you'll see that I've created a folder called Railo, because let's go back and let's just look at this real quick. You'll notice that the original zip file, if I can find it, the original zip file did not have, it had the web-inf folder, but it did not have a folder called Railo inside this web-inf folder. So of course, whenever I pasted it into this environment here, it didn't have this Railo folder. So if you look at the web or the web context administrator XML file, this one right here, you'll notice that it's in inf Railo, and then there's the file. So what I did was I created a folder called inf, in inf I created a folder called Railo, and then I created a folder or curated a file that was an exact copy of this file. And then I did the same thing for server administrator. I looked at this path and I said, well, here's the web-inf, and it looks like it's going into the library folder, lib, and then it's going into another folder called Railo server, and then another one called context, and then you have railo-server.xml, which is the configuration file for the server context. So what I did was I created a folder, and again, if we go back to this right here, oops, where's my zip file? If we go back to this right here, you'll notice that this is the contents of the zip file again. You'll notice that there was none of these files existed. So I created these files, and then I created the server XML. One of the ways you can do that is literally take this path that's here, which is what I did, and then go over to your web browser, click on it, and then it'll bring up the contents of the file, and then hit page save as, and then you can save that page into your web content as I did. And so that's the quick and easy way to get the right contents. Plus, and I suggest you do this after you've created a password and after you've created all your settings, because this right here is the password, and as you can see, it is encrypted. So once you get your settings set up, you go through this process again, but nonetheless, that's the way I got my file created. So once that file is created, what's going to happen is when you go up here to run, let's go ahead and stop this real quick. You go up here to run your site locally. It's going to take the copies, or it's going to take copies of what's in these folders, and it's going to overwrite what's in the temp directory with those copies. So any settings that you create here, right here, will actually show up inside of the temp directory settings, which means that when you deploy this out to Amazon Web Services, that all your settings, because they're here in this folder structure, will go with it, and whenever Amazon goes to deploy your package, it's going to use those settings. So again, maybe this was old hat for everybody else who's lived in the Railo world for a while or lived in the Java Web Project world. This may be old hat. This may be something that you already knew, but for people like me who are coming from a much more traditional setup, Windows-based box, this was totally foreign to me and was quite a stretch. So I hope this helps other people, and if you have any questions or comments, just leave them on the video. I'll try to get back to you guys. Thanks a lot.